Hello there. Welcome to episode 49 of Bow and Blade, a podcast brought to you by medievalist.net, your home for all things medieval on the internet. Bow and Blade gives you a seat at the bar as scholars of medieval warfare go beyond the Wikipedia articles to talk about the debates and the questions that we're working on today. I'm Michael Livingston, Distinguished Professor at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina.
And I'm Kelly DeVries, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Military History at the Air Force Academy and a Professor of History at Loyola University in Baltimore. And my thoughts go out to Baltimore, the big Francis Scott Key Bridge, boy, folding like it did. I think they've lost a few people, and that's sad. Really sad to see that. But driven over that bridge a number of times. To have it fold like that was pretty something.
Utterly frightening to wake up this morning and see that. Just
Utterly
extraordinary.
frightening. Yeah, and I'm hoping that nobody from Baltimore, where Loyola University is, that were there, that I may have taught or may know. Anyway, thoughts go out to all those people who were on the bridge.
Yeah,
It,
what a terrible disaster. Terrible disaster. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and it's so weird sort of doing the podcast today in lieu of that because what we're going to be talking about today has some kind of, I don't know, sort of feelings like that with the bridge going across the water and um the what that means to try and cross bodies of water and how important that is.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, we're doing the big one today. We Constantinople in 1453, and Mike and I had both were there last year. Had the very fine opportunity, and thanks to George Theodicus and his group for bringing us for having us a conference in the Suleiman Mosque, right there, overlooking all that water, and
yeah,
and all the water and Golden Horn and envisioning what it would look like from there, the siege looking like from there. So
a really, really great conference. I mean, it was
yeah,
fantastically put together. They did a terrific job. He and his university there that he was working with. Yeah, I mean,
terrific.
amazing location and good people involved. It was really good.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be another time that we give a paper actually in a madras that was built before they finished the Suleiman Mosque again.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of once in a lifetime. So I'll
It
take it.
was.
I'll take it.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
so yeah, we're doing Siege of Constantinople, 1453. One of the absolute like dates you got to know in history is 1453. I tell my students like, there's six dates or whatever to know in history. Like this is one of them.
This is one of
Uh,
them. There's no question.
Before
No
we
question.
get too deep in that, though, what are you drinking tonight?
I was thinking about that, and technically the Ottomans weren't supposed to drink. They did, and it's one of the things where they kind of went beyond the Quran. Today, of course, you can find all sorts of very nice cocktails and so forth in Constantinople. I don't know whether there's a Bloody Turk. If there isn't a Bloody Turk drink, there should probably be one. But otherwise, there's some awfully good grapes from the Anatolian subcontinent there. So maybe I'll go with a nice red, dark, bloody red from the Anatolian from the Anatolian plain.
Yeah, I mean, we had, I think, when we were in Istanbul, we had a really delightful Turkish wine at one of the places that we went to, and yeah, it was quite good. We also had we had a really nice beer that I don't remember what it was.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't either. You're more in the beer than I am, but because
uh,
of the allergies. But it
yeah, it
was
was
the
it was a
nice
really good
label too,
beer.
because it had like a half dozen umlauts in it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was like, I can't pronounce this, but I'll drink it.
That's right.
That's. I'm just gonna
You know
point.
a beer.
I'm gonna point and shoot. Give me that one. Give me that one
Yeah,
tonight.
you know a beer is
Um,
good when it's got half a dozen umlauts in it.
yeah. So 1453. Oh boy, where do you? Look. I guess let's start like just really simply for people. before we kind of get closer to, the action. Um, Rome didn't fall; it just moved.
Yeah.
It just
According
moved.
to some, I think this is a totally different empire. But go ahead.
So you have the Byzantine Empire, it's called, which
Yeah.
styles itself as the next run in Rome, sort of a new Rome getting built in what was then Byzantium that becomes Constantinople, and it is really remarkable, the degree to which they're trying to sort of replicate, Roman everything seemingly. It's really quite cool. It's really quite delightful.
And be all there in 1453. The palace, the Hagia Sophia, which of course is still there, the little Hagia Sophia. The Hippodrome would have had its seats, would have had its stadium around it. Nowadays, you just walk and see the three things in the middle that would have been there as well. A full snake, twirling or twisting snake monument with the three heads, and the obelisk, and also the four horsemen that are in Venice now. They all would have been there. It was a very different empire though than it had been. We haven't done the fourth crusade, but it's a very different empire than it had been at that time. It's a very different empire than it was at the time of Justinian and Heraclius too. But it's still the grand city, and more importantly for the Turks, they've won everything around it. They had
Yeah.
started in 1301. They had an eye on Constantinople from the very beginning, but they knew they just couldn't take it on. There were at least four sieges in the Ottoman Turkish time, and this is the final one. It's the only one that does succeed, which we'll want to talk about. But it's a city that has very few people in it compared to what it once was. We're not talking about millions anymore. We're talking about thousands.
Yeah, especially as the Turks are coming, and they know they're coming. There's no this isn't a surprise. As we
No,
as we get into the numbers, there's no way to surprise attack with this many. But I love what you've said there about the centrality of this, because that's the key thing. Even through all the changes that the Byzantine Empire has undergone, and it is a very different place from where it kind of started. Um, the city itself has never lost that central position. And it's never lost that because it is such a central position. I mean, quite literally, right? Enormously wealthy from trade. This is the center of, expansive trade networks, overland, overseas. It's the center of this part of the world in many respects, in kind of terms of economics. So yeah, people wanted it.
Constantine is the first Roman emperor to understand this, to see it. I mean, if you go today through the park on the end, right before the Bosphorus, um, right below the National History Museum, the you see the this big sign said, "Here's where Claudius Gothicus crossed the Bosphorus." Well, he wasn't the only one. Julian will cross there. Constantius II will be crossing there. A lot of different emperors have crossed there before and after. It's Constantine's vision that brings it all together in 330, because he recognizes how prosperous it can be, the way it is surrounded by water, and the way that you can have a natural harbor off to the northern part of the city, and things like that. I think he wouldn't have been entirely surprised by the vision of the city in 1453, except for the big, large army that's standing outside its walls, had been there for a year. I think that would have maybe surprised him.
That would have, yeah, he had been like, that's a lot. But yeah, the
Yeah,
idea of what this becomes was fairly kind of, uh, you know almost prophetically seen, as you say,
yeah,
from far back. And so much of it, as you say, has to deal with the this northern body of water, the Golden Horn, which is very, very good harborage, nicely protected, and right along the northern edge of the city. So it makes for this massive natural harbor.
yeah.
And then the main city is on a peninsula, of course, right, south of that, surrounded on three sides by water, and relatively defensible on its own. But then you start adding to it because people want your stuff. You need to start fortifying against them. A series of walls,
Yeah.
both along the sea and then cutting off the peninsula. So that by the time you get to 1453, this place is very, very well protected.
I'm possibly the best protected place in the entirety of that size in the entirety of the world. I mean, I can't think of another city that big. But Constantinople, even though it has gone down in population just prior to this siege, because anybody who has any money has left, and there's lots of places to go where they could have not been under Byzantine control, but certainly had the protection of the Cretans or the protection of the Hospitallers of Rhodes, and not have to worry about being under siege. That it still was a massive city, especially geography. Even today, and you and I walked the walls this last time, so we know the land walls, so we know how long they were. And they date, some of that bits date all the way back to the fourth century, back to when Theodosius improved the size of the city after Constantine built the first walls on the inside, but that are now gone. Uh, it just is, it's just impressive. And what it must have been to see it coming in from the sea. I mean, we get to see it coming in from the air, but when one of these times, I wouldn't mind taking a boat trip over from Crete or over from Rhodes just to see the city coming in off the Bosphorus or off the Mediterranean. It it must be amazing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, God, today it's as you said, it's unbelievable. I mean, walking the kind of the main walls as we kind of look at them now, which go across, cutting off the peninsula.
Yeah,
Um, those walls are just massive.
they are massive. Yeah,
They're massive, and they're massively thick. They're massively tall. They're up to 12 meters in height. I mean, these are just enormous walls, and this is what has maintained Constantinople. This has been the thing.
yeah.
How are you going to take this place? Well, you can try and attack it by sea, but it's tough to marine land against a fortified location. That's really hard to do. So your best bet is to try and take it by land somehow. But there are these massive walls because the
Yeah.
emperors know darn well that's how you need to take it. And nobody's been able to breach those walls.
A lot of people
Um,
tried. A lot of
but
people tried.
a lot of people have
Um,
tried it.
the Muslims tried, right, not too long after they broke through, what and hit the Byzantine Empire within the Middle East and Egypt, and also the Persians. They came over to try to get it. I mean, it seems that this was one of Muhammad's dreams was to get the city, but they get turned back in 1516. And then I mean, the Crusaders get in the Fourth Crusade, and there's some discussion about how they got into the city. I think they got in the city by saying, "Hi, we're friends. We're Christians. You don't see what this kind of Jedi mind trick of we're here as friends. Now we'll take you
Yeah.
on." But
Uh, yeah. Taking it by force as is going to happen in 1453.
yeah,
This
gonna
had
happen.
not been done. And to try and do so requires a logistical achievement that I don't think gets talked about enough. Because what's
No,
interesting
you're
about
absolutely right.
1453 is that in for us educated in the West or whatever, like everybody knows the importance of 1453, but it
Mm-hmm.
mostly gets talked about as a um, oh, uh, the empire was kind of crumbling back. weakening, and then there's this kind of killing blow. And it has this sort of inevitability feel to it, and it has a kind of like, oh, well, then that kind of happened. And that doesn't give, I don't think, enough credit to the accomplishment here of what actually transpires. Because, for the Ottomans to do what they actually do, for Mehmed to manage this and become Mehmed the Conqueror, I mean, this is unbelievable logistical capability.
Yeah. And I think you've got a really good point there then, because it had been taken before, and it's often on the siege that had happened, that Mehmed's father had done, Murad the First had done in the early part of the 15th century. They were on the verge of falling then too, but did not. And so the city itself has been under siege before. They prepare very well. They bring foodstuffs in, and then the biggest thing is that nobody has been able until 1453. Nobody had been able to knock out the Bosphorus, and that road, that river road, if you want to call it a straight road up to the Black Sea, means that it's very very hard to keep to force surrender out of starvation onto the people there. In fact, there's a couple of times the couple of the sieges, the one that Murad does is a perfect example of this, where the people on the outside run out of food before the people on the inside do.
Yeah.
So it's not a normal siege in that way. And the walls are so big that even though Mehmed in this siege and others have tried to mine them, it's almost an impossibility to do so because they're so wide.
Yeah, I mean they're brilliantly built. They are well aware of the capabilities of what is needed to take down the walls, and they can afford, and by need, are willing to pay and do the work to build these things in a way that cannot be defeated under any kind of normal circumstance. Which Mehmed well knows this, and so he takes
Yeah,
abnormal or extraordinary is perhaps the better word, efforts to conquer this. And this is years of preparation.
it is.
And
It is.
there is no question he's coming. Again, people knew. And as you said, kind of at the beginning, this is part of why there are, probably in the thousands, not the tens of thousands of people that are left in
Mhm.
Constantinople. The city
Yeah,
is relatively empty, because they know he's coming.
yeah,
Not
and
necessarily that
and
they thought it would fall, but a siege is not a great thing to live through anyway. So
no,
get out
that's
while
right.
you can.
That's the point. Is that if you're wealthy enough to get you and your family out, even if you stay behind to defend the walls, or your sons stay behind to defend the walls, it still means that for the protection of the others, you try to get them out. Non-combatant in a siege can be mistreated, as we've seen so many times. Before the siege of Acre with Richard killing prisoners, other sieges like that. The Ottomans were not particularly well known for mercy when they took a city. Will be different in that regard. Mehmed actually gets a pretty good reputation for when he conquers the city and does not kill people, does not massacre those inside.
Well, he
The
doesn't enslave some tens of thousands of them.
He
I
does
mean,
enslave, yeah, and yeah, he
that
does.
does
I mean,
count. I mean,
and you're right, that does count. And although in its own, within a few years, you've got the siege of Tunis, and Charles V is going to enslave. He's going to free. Everybody listens about, oh, Charles V freed all these slaves. Yeah, but he also took more in enslaving them. Somebody's got to roll the ships, I suppose. That's no excuse for slavery, but it was customary at this point in time, but not the way that some would have it, which is massacre of the people inside, or even much prohibition against the Christians' practice of Christianity. In fact, when he goes in, one of the things he does with the Janissaries is puts them outside Hagia Sophia, says this church is for me, and he puts them outside of St. Catherine's and says this is the church for the Christians to practice, and nothing will be done to either of these churches. And the Janissaries, who know that they're going to get paid, don't need to take part in the 3 day the 3 day route, which somehow Mehmed reads into the Quran that they're permitted 3 days of routing of ravaging the city. The Janissaries do obey and protect those two sides. We still have them both.
Yeah, and yeah, thank goodness they did. I mean, they are extraordinary sites to visit. And I mean, throughout this, I'm sure we're going to be saying again and again, go visit Istanbul.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
have the chance, it is one of the more extraordinary cities on the planet. It really is, from a historical standpoint, to stand there and look down on the Golden Horn, to look at Hagia Sophia from the outside and then walk into that place. It's magical. It truly is magical. Obviously, a lot of horrors, a lot of horrors. We're going to
yeah.
talk
Over
about
the
some today,
centuries, yes,
but an extraordinary, extraordinary place to visit. Um,
absolutely.
so,
And the one thing that was new this time, I'd been to Istanbul maybe 20 times, but as we're walking along the road, there's the brand new museum to the siege out in the park, out beyond the walls. That was the first time I'd seen it. It isn't that old. So make sure you go and see that, even though it's got some cheesiness to it.
oh, it was
It
fantastic.
it was fantastic. Yeah,
The Panorama 1453 Museum,
that's what
and
it is. Yeah.
it's delightful. It's delightful. You must go see
Yeah,
it. Utterly
yeah,
delightful.
utterly
Um,
delightful.
so okay, there's a lot of preparation to be made here, and the preparations are uh, absolutely multiple assets here of land and navy, because you need to try and cut off supplies from getting into the city. There's your navy. You also need to transport your people over the water, potentially. So you got to have control of the waters for that standpoint too. So there's enormous fleet activity that the Ottomans are involved in, and they also have to get all these men. Um, Now, how many men does Mehmed bring, Kelly? I know
Well,
my number. What's your number?
my number. So yeah, this is always a hard one. I'm going to go with the 100,000 number. Uh, I think that I mean, the plane. If you look, I would. In fact, one of the things I was trying to do this year was to look out from the walls where we do get a good sense of what the plane was like that, and see if I could figure out how many men that would hold. Traditionally, there's about 100, 130,000 total that people give to Mehmed. And I don't know that that is too low. I think the 100,000 may be, but the plane could certainly hold them. There's no question about that. And yeah, I think I'm more concerned about how many are inside. Basically, Mehmed could get anybody he wants outside. So what about those inside? Where's your number sit there? First of
Well,
all, what's your number outside? I know you're going to
so the
tell me.
number outside, I think there's fewer than 100,000. But you know me, I tend to lowball these things.
Yeah.
Not that. I mean, 100,000 is possible. This isn't like the Xerxes in 480, and you're just like, that's not possible, that number.
No, not
Um,
not possible doing a hundred
yeah,
thousand. No.
this number 100,000 is possible. Now, some of the other numbers, like we have accounts at the time, it's 300,000 or whatever. Like, no, that's not happening. 100,000 is possible. I think it's probably less than that. I think it's probably closer to 75, but it is. Look, 75,000
Yeah, yeah,
is huge. It's unreal. It
and
is
that's the
absolutely
thing.
unreal. And
The,
I
for some of these things, it's just what is the potential that we look at more than how many were actually there, because it's very difficult to see how many were actually there. But the more important thing I think in this is that Mehmed could have gotten anybody he wanted. His empire is already pretty big. It's extended over to the Balkans at this point. He doesn't have Belgrade. He doesn't have Rhodes. He doesn't have Crete, but he's got pretty much everything else from Egypt all the way across. And um, I think that he could put potential there. Whereas the inside the city, if we've got, I know the numbers around 7 to 10,000 with maybe 35,000 armed. So I think that's too high. I think we're looking really at below 5,000 on the walls. And some of those are even Turks.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's talking about relative numbers. It's a tenth, right? So the number of people inside the walls is roughly a tenth of what is brought against them. Now, the walls in between are a heck of a force multiplier. You can be down 1 to 10 with those walls as long as the walls hold. And that's the big key element here is making the walls hold. And for all the men that Mehmed has brought, um, I'm not saying that the men are not important, but there's something else that he has bringing against the walls that has
Yeah.
not previously been brought against these walls in the way that he brings them. And what's that, Kelly?
And that's big effing guns. There's a large number of big guns. The first time I made a foray outside of my comfort zone as a young scholar was to do an article on the gun battle weapons of at the Siege of Constantinople. Very fortunate in the number of sources that are there, and very fortunate in the number of sources that are there from the losing side, the ones that are writing from the Christian world. There are a couple of ones from the Ottoman world too that confirm all this, but it does give a lot of evidence on guns and guns being built, and we get a little bit turned on by this guy Orban, who's Hungarian. I was watching the great epic 1453 Conquest, and they had a whole bunch of things about Orban making the guns there and so forth and so on. He does make one huge one, but I don't even know that it's actually at Constantinople. I think it actually is too big to be moved. But they do. It is funny the various things that they talk about when they're firing that gun off for the first time, and they send out notices that all pregnant women should not be there unless the blast caused them to give birth, and that anybody who's a little bit shy should not be there. That this is going to explode, and for all intents and purposes, it did. But it probably wasn't Urban's guns that were more impressive than the big bombards that the Mehmed have. And there are 5 of those still existent. And they are huge. They are 4 foot, 4 foot caliber with, being able to fire a ball of 300 pounds plus. And no matter how big the walls are, you keep pounding on one side, pounding in one place with one of these big, huge bombards. It's going to make an effort to breach the wall. It's going to breach them, and it seems that in studying these now, I should probably say that the major work that has been written, Philippides and Hanek's major book on the Siege of Constantinople, does not like my article on guns which is a little bit of a disappointment. Although it's been defended, my article's been defended by somebody completely different than me. I was going to give in somewhere, but it it is different to recognize that Mehmed had enough knowledge of using these weapons that he was able to sight and find the weak spots and then hammer at those weak spots. One, in fact, near the Golden Horn at Black and Knight Palace, where he found that the wall was weak enough. And that's where they will eventually break in. So that was a bit different. And the Byzantines, the one thing, the Byzantines had guns. They were nowhere like Mehmed's.
Yeah, I mean, well, nobody had really seen this. I mean, this kind of firepower, literal
Yeah,
firepower,
yeah.
um,
Bombards as
multiplied
such.
out.
Yeah, then that's the point. Multiplied
Yeah,
out. Bombards have been seen elsewhere in
yeah,
Europe. We've got tons of them, but we don't see them. I mean, then Charles the Bold, at about after this time, Charles the Bold of Burgundy is taking to Beauvais in 1480, taking one bombard.
yeah,
And as far as we know, that there are tens and twenties of these bombards that are being used by Mehmed. The fact that five is still extant is pretty remarkable, but also may give a sense about how many he had total in his army.
yeah. These are enormous artillery pieces, and he's using them as an artillery, like as a focused artillery, and as you said, has sighted them in, which is a testament to reconnaissance and engineering and all sorts of things. To know I'm going to pummel this wall, this supposedly impregnable wall, in certain positions, um, and I've got enough of these pieces that, yeah, I mean, some are going to uh, unmake themselves upon
Hmm.
firing, as will happen.
We,
Fine, roll another one
yeah,
up.
roll another one up, and they do. I mean, we do have one from 1464 that's actually dated. That wouldn't have been used to this siege, and the technology, it's the Royal Armouries, and the technology is amazing. This is solid bronze casting. It's in two pieces. I should say solid bronze. It's in two pieces that they screw together, and it's massive. But I always think we forget, because these are amazing. These are behemoths. They're the elephants of the cannonball, of the gunpowder weaponry, artillery, uh, arsenal at this point. But Mehmed also had smaller guns, and a lot of them. The ones that he puts up on Rumili Hisar, which he's had built in a year to face Andalui Hisar, which had been captured and then redone. The guns that are there can only hit about halfway across the Bosphorus, and that's all they're meant to do. They couldn't be the big ones. Everybody thinks they were big ones. There was even this weird theory that came out in the 19th century that somehow he was bouncing them off the top of the river, off the top of the Bosphorus to hit it. No, no, they flew. We didn't play Skippy Scones. Let's see how many times it'll skip across the water until it hits some ship. But the second ship coming out of the Black Sea gets sunk when they start turning on that arsenal. And those have got to be medium-sized weapons. And we know that the Janissaries and some of the other corps that Mehmed have are using handheld weapons. So I think it's the diversity of the weapons, as well as the size of the large bombards that take on the walls, principally, that are really what will cause the end of this city. Its defenses break through the walls.
Right. And there's another key aspect to all this. The city's surrounded on three sides by water, one of those being, the sort of Golden Horn, this remarkable inner harbor, if you will, this natural harbor. Um, and for centuries now, they have had the ability, that is, say, the Byzantines have had the ability to put a chain across that water to prevent anybody from getting in there, right? So you can easily protect that entire north side of the city just by preventing anybody from getting onto this water. Quite brilliant, quite awesome. I believe we talked about it previously when we talked about Stanford Bridge, maybe, or something like that. We talked about
No,
Harold
roads.
Hardrada.
We had it at roads. They
Oh,
have
we talked
two
about it in
major
roads
roads.
briefly.
Yeah. Stamford
Uh,
Bridge, they may have had a chain, and
no, no, you're misunderstanding me, Kelly. When we
oh,
referred to
okay.
Harold Hardrada at a certain point,
Oh
and
yes,
and I think we
absolutely.
talked about that happening. So
We did,
anyway,
yes.
yes, no, no,
Yes, you're right.
there was no chain across the Bosporus at Stamford Bridge. Correct.
Damn, I thought it was
Yeah. Thanks
yeah.
for calling me out on that. So yeah,
No,
they
you're
had
absolutely
this
right. Yeah, I wasn't
they
thinking. That was
they had
absolutely right.
this chain. It had been there for quite some time, and obviously they put it up so the Turkish fleet cannot get in there. And look, this is a problem. The Turks would like to get their ships in there. So how do the Turks get around this here chain?
Well, it's amazing because just before, you could almost everybody that I when I teach the Siege of Constantinople, they almost all think, well, why not just ride over this chain? Well, a lot of the chain still exists. In fact, there's a huge amount in the military museum and the naval museum, but then the big part in the National Historical Museum, it's huge. The links are like 4 feet long and absolutely solid iron. And once they pull it into position, if you do chance, as the legend of Harold Hardrada, going over the top, you break your hull. One of the two ships that he takes breaks its hull and goes to the bottom of the Bosphorus, which is a nice poetic term, I think, bottom of the Bosphorus.
Yeah.
But the in this case, the Ottoman ships, they try whatever they can to get around that chain, get under the chain, go over the chain, and then ultimately they do the unthinkable and they transfer an army overland
Uh,
behind Galata.
not an army,
No,
a,
Navy.
a
A
navy.
Navy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a
I'm sorry.
fleet.
That was me misspeaking. Yes, that was definitely me misspeaking. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Uh, wow. So and I mean it's one thing, again, having been there, it's one thing to sort of say, oh, well, they transferred their ships overland. Okay. And to sort of see it on a map, oh, okay, that's pretty impressive that they sort of took it all that way. It's quite another to see the geography over which they had to take these ships. It because it's not flat. It's not flat.
It's no, it's not. It's not as high now. Galata or Galatera, however you want to pronounce it, does is on a hill itself. So
Yeah,
they didn't go up and over it. They went behind it in a kind of
yeah,
valley. But it's still that they have to go. If you think the Bosphorus is sea level, they're going at least 100 feet up and over this and down into the Bosphorus, and they're dragging their ships on oil-soaked timber, oil-soaked trees.
yeah, and it's like over 2 miles.
It is
It
over two
is
miles. Yeah,
it is a
that's even more
long
impressive.
way that
Yes.
they got to do this. And yeah, they've greased these logs. And it's, put a log in front, push it a little bit, take a log in back, put it in front to get these ships all the way over this. It's one of these things that I, it's hard to imagine what it must have been to sort of look out from the walls of Constantinople and be like, oh my God,
Yeah, yeah.
they're dragging ships over land to come get us. Uh, we're screwed.
And I mean, I've wondered often and had some. This is a purely academic argument. I mean, how necessary was it to bring these ships around? Because they get there really by the time, really the end. Now it's the walls fall not very far from the Golden Horn, so they're. But I've wondered exactly, how much is this theater? How much is, how much is to demoralize the others? I mean, you if you're sitting in Byzantium and you see a fleet go overland, you got to be thinking, all right, yeah, time to surrender. Not a lot left to do. Time to surrender. There are some scholars that think that it didn't really that they could have done without this, that he could have still taken it without this, and that's probably true. But what an act of defiance!
Yeah, as you said, absolutely demoralizing. And uh, the city tries to go out and attack his ships. And actually some of they're repulsed. They don't manage to do a lot of damage to the ships. And those who are captured from this, Mehmet has them impaled, apparently, along the
Yeah,
shoreline, on
yeah.
the northern shoreline, in sight, and as much view as he can of the city. Look what happens if you defy me. He impales these people. Yeah, he's such a merciful guy. Um,
Gee,
yeah.
not I'm sort of not into impaling. Thank you very much. One of my lowest three ways to die, I think. Yeah, this, but a very display, boy, very theatrical display too. And it's clear that he is trying everything he can. I think if well, I've got to write a popular account of the Siege of Constantinople, and I'm toying a little bit with how much of this attack on Golden Horde and what happens within that immediate attack on the ships inside the our is theater, and what does it accomplish. And it it accomplishes a lot. It tells the Byzantines, this is it, you're done. There's nowhere that you cannot protect against me. And it's not too long after that that the walls start falling. One big breach is made, and the troops pour in, and that's it.
Yeah, and it cuts off. There's no way any supplies are getting in at this point. You're if you're inside, you're screwed. The snake is coiled around you and it's tightening down. And as you said, all it takes at that point is just the breach into the walls. Um, and look, they had been trying, both sides have been trying very desperate. On the one hand, to knock it down, the other hand, to repair. And the one downside of these big bombards is they don't have a high rate of fire. And yes, you have multiple of them, but even so, man, it takes a long time to load these things. Not only to load them, but to let them cool down enough. You don't want them to blow. And so people are repairing as fast as they can. But like there's only so much repair you can do. And even though I mean, they're, again, a testament to engineering that they're trying to sight these things and stuff, but these are not, rifled barrels or whatever.
No,
The ability to sight them in is, you're statistically sighting them in, but enough time, enough shots. Eventually the pummeling is going to start to crack things, to break things, and to cause a breach.
and it does, yeah.
Um,
It's here where the when I fell in, I can't say I fell in love with the Siege of Constantinople. That sounds so wrong, but I really became interested in the Siege of Constantinople when I was a young academic and read Sir Stephen Runciman's book. He writes incredibly well. Siege of Constantinople, 1453, is still one of his most incredible books until the last 30 pages. And then he changes the ending. He has a door left open by a Greek. Runciman cannot actually think the Turks would ever defeat the Byzantines, so they had to defeat themselves. So he has this door left in, and that's how they go in. And of course, it isn't that way at all. Uh, but it is a beautiful book to get through that point, and then just say no. Yeah, they blew a breach in the walls by the Black and Eye Palace, and it doesn't take much at that point. Even though the remaining Byzantines all lined up there because they knew the assault was going to be made, and there's some fierce hand-to-hand combat. If you've only got about 5,000 forces inside, eventually it doesn't matter how many. It could be 25. If it's 100,000, it's even quicker over. There's no defense there. And I think, one of the things that we have to point out too, when looking at the very end of this, is there's no relief army that's come. there are a few Genoese that have joined from either over at Galata or over at from Genoa. The Venetians are scared to death to do anything, so they don't let any troops come from Crete or Cyprus, and they certainly don't provide any themselves because they're scared of losing the islands in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Hospitallers are forbidden to go there. It's them alone. And now,
Yeah.
when you get a huge breach like that, you're done. It's just the time it takes at that point.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of like, I mean, scale people's expectations here. When we talk about a breach of the walls, don't imagine Lord of the Rings Helm's Deep kind of thing. It's not like the
Yeah, no
wall is,
gunpowder.
yeah, there's no gunpowder under it. It's not like the wall is erased. It is simply now fractured, rubbled enough in spots that you can actually, with ladders and enough people, you can surge over. And that's what you need to kind of think about happening here. And that the break is big enough. Yeah, you can sort of line men on top of that pile, and people are going to have to try and get through you. But as you said, you have enough people to throw at, enough bodies. Even if you're losing five for every one of theirs, odds are in your favor. It's odds are 10 to 1, so you're going to break through. You just have to be willing to lose them.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, Mehmed is okay with it. He is going to do this no matter what it takes. And once that final assault begins, uh, this is pretty quick. I mean, the
Yeah.
siege
Oh, yeah.
itself is actually fairly quick by siege. This is not a year siege of Calais. This is like a month and change that things
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
serious. And then when the assault happens, it's that day and
Yeah.
it's basically done.
1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days from when the first attack is made. Now, there's a lot more preparations that we pointed out, and I'm glad you bring up the fact that we define breaches as we want it all to be. Helm's Deep is the perfect example because we've seen the. I don't think there's anybody in the world who hasn't seen Tolkien's movies. I think in New Zealand they actually put them in the nursery for the babies to watch,
As they should, as
um,
they should.
as they should. Yeah, but the this is a small breach. I think the best thing is it can't be repaired. So it's so large it can't be repaired, and that means that there's going to be a trickle of soldiers coming in, and then that trickle will lead to a river, and that's yeah. If you're inside, you do what you can because you're fighting for your families at that point. You're fighting for your honor. You're fighting for everything, but there's not a lot of time left, and we don't see a lot of veterans um, from Constantinople come out of this battle. Not a large number, not from the
Uh,
West.
yeah, I mean it is over. Like I said, it's that day. Like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
it is a wave that
Yeah.
just washes in. And as soon as, you know, sort of one area begins to fall, this becomes just domino effect because you're able to open up the gates along the rest of the wall and things are pouring in. And you can just imagine, the kind of, people streaming as best they could, hoping for safety, for some kind of fallback, heading towards the palace areas. But there essentially is none. I mean, at this point, that was the defense, and it being broken, your best hope is, maybe I can get some sort of, ship that happens to still be able to get out of here, or that kind of thing. Which,
And
but
there are
that's,
some.
yeah, that's all that you get.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're stuck.
No, and I mean the perfect example here is that the leader of the forces on the Byzantine side is a man by the name of Giovanni Giustiniani, and he's Genoese, and he gets wounded in the first part of this attack on there, and he gets taken to a ship, and the ship will eventually make it out, and the man lives. Uh, Probably if he'd been wounded later, that wouldn't have been the case. There wouldn't have been enough time to take him out. Constantine the 11th dies in this engagement. Some of his commanders die in this engagement. So there's a lot of it's this is the fight to the death at that point. There's no there's no being saved at the last minute by anybody.
the atrocities that occur. Um,
There are some, and there are some. In any siege like this, there's going to be atrocities that occur. Mehmed was pretty tight on his army, um, not doing the contempt, not doing what was standard. He gave them 3 days of looting, but they could not. They were not supposed to rape. They were not supposed to kill without his permission and other things. But you're sacking a city, it's going to happen, and they did. Although only for 3 days. At the end of 3 days, they stop. And Mehmed looks out over his city and says, "Yeah, it's still pretty much intact." That's the one thing I think that we forget sometimes. Those who want to capture a city, and Mehmed definitely wants to capture the city. This is going to be his capital. So on the day before it's taken, it's a Byzantine capital. On the day after it's taken, it's the Turkish capital, and so there's not a lot of damage you can do.
and you're ultimately going to bring in a lot more populace, but yeah, there is yeah, a lot of thousands die. The number of rapes and other atrocities are uncountable. And even yes, he says, well, don't destroy Hagia Sophia. This one's mine. But of course, he goes in and he destroys the altar. I mean, like there's this. This is religious. This is I am like this is now it's mine, and that means it's no longer yours. And I'm going to um, make cleanse it from his kind of standpoint.
Oh
Um,
yeah, there's going to be those. Although there is the story that Critobulus gives us that Mehmed rides in, and of course he doesn't get off his horse. The first thing, desecrating a church like Hagia Sophia, ride in with your horse pooping on the
yeah,
ground. But he sees one of his soldiers hacking at the beautiful mosaics that are in there, and he wants to preserve them. So he goes over to his guy and takes his head off personally. That's what Critobulus says. And he looks down and he said, "This is mine. This is mine. This is for me to do what I want with it." And it becomes his personal, as it was with the emperors before. It's his personal church. So he doesn't want it destroyed, and he's the one that first puts the banners in front of the Christian artwork so that they're not damaged. So I think he did not want to see as much damage. Of course, he doesn't want to see the infrastructure destroyed. He needs the water. He needs those water channels coming into the city because it's surrounded by water, but none is drinkable.
yeah,
So you cannot be blocking cisterns and you cannot be doing other things. And he seems to understand that.
yeah,
So I think probably when we're looking at actual physical damage of buildings and maybe potential damage of people, this is not a siege that gets this where the city gets just razed. It is there is limited damage that can be done.
yeah. And in the process of doing this, um, and taking it all over, of course, we do have to obviously you acknowledge the atrocities, you also acknowledge the brilliance of what Mehmed has done here.
Yeah,
um, and the cultural impact of this event on the psyche of Europe is I mean perhaps immeasurable. Because you had setbacks before,
yeah,
you'd had defeats before, but Constantinople had always held, and for it to fall,
yeah.
for this beating heart of Eastern Rome to fall, I mean, this is devastating to the
Yeah.
cultural psyche.
1453 is not a year without news. Battle of Castillon fought, last battle of the Hundred Years' War. Bordeaux
Yep.
falls, last area of the Hundred Years' War. It's the end of a big, huge Flemish revolt that finally gets the Burgundians pull into position. There's things happening in northern Italy. All of it is stopped when Constantinople falls. It's of lesser importance, even in the farthest west of Europe as you can get. they hear that Constantinople has fallen. It is no matter what they felt about the different types of Christianity that was practiced there versus the Christianity practiced in Western Europe. The fact that it fell, the fact that it fell was evidence that Christianity did not have the pull it once had. It did not have the Mediterranean, and that was the gemstone.
Yeah, and our crusading calls are not let's go get Jerusalem. It's maybe let's go try and get Constantinople, right? This is now and of course it doesn't happen.
No, 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 it
Uh,
doesn't have the fact that there's not even an attack made. Part of that is because the Ottomans don't stop. They still do have Belgrade, which they'll go after in 1456, and they'll have Rhodes that go after 1480. And then when Mehmed's great grandson comes on the throne, Suleiman, he's going to go back after those areas. So he doesn't stop, but there's no more. The crusading has changed with the rise of the Ottomans. The crusade calls, of course, Nicopolis and Knossos and some of these others are all calls to go against the Ottomans. But you're absolutely right. Once Constantinople is taken, there's not much discussion about retaking Jerusalem. The idea that if you cannot use Constantinople as some sort of a base to go to get Jerusalem, how are you going to get Jerusalem? It's now
yeah.
become Constantinople.
Yeah, the logistical, dynamics, the economics, the theology. I mean, this is hitting every level of Europe's sense of itself,
Yeah.
and its sense of how it can, act in the world. And yeah, so it rightly deserves to this position in the world. And as you said, it's not the only thing that happens that year. We
But
did an
it's,
episode previously on Castillon.
yeah.
That was episode 33 for those following at home. That we talked about that. I mean, it's around this time, the printing press is taking off and things too. That
Yeah. Yeah.
so you also are getting uh, the sort of beginnings of an international um, awareness even of news as it were, that information can now travel along these trade routes that are long established, and the news that this has fallen moves very, very rapidly through the world. It's one of the sort of first events that you can be like, this just happened. It's not exactly Krakatoa, right, which becomes the first event, I think, to be known around the world within 24 hours, I think, is Krakatoa. It's not quite that, but it is
It's close.
rapidly known.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, and you're right about the printing press because within 2 years of this falling, now printing press is only around 1450, 1449, 1450, so it's not this much or earlier. But within 2 years, all these accounts that we have on Constantinople are in print. And one of the reasons we still have so many of them is we're not relying on manuscripts because we've got printed copies of these books coming out. And yeah, it gets around. And I think it's one of the reasons why Pius II will become Pope in 1456. He's been very much, let's go get the Ottomans, go get the Ottomans, go get the Ottomans. In 1453, he takes huge advantage of it as a propaganda point. Look, we hadn't been there to help Constantinople. Let's go re-get it. There's no discussion about giving it back to the Byzantines, but he's very active in this, and it may have maybe one of the reasons why he is elevated to the papacy in 1456. Now, he constantly speaks about crusade against Constantinople after that until he dies and nobody shows up. But there's also Eastern bishops like George of Trebizond, who's around and preaching, and he's saying, "Look, we'll all become Catholic if you just join us in getting back this city," and it never does. There's still a couple of Byzantine holdouts. Trebizond won't go until 1456, and Mistra, I think, is even further away, but they're very small spots of the Byzantine Empire surviving at this point.
Yeah, it's essentially over. And I'm glad you note the proliferation of accounts because we do have dozens of accounts of
Yeah.
this. And a striking number of them eyewitness accounts,
Yes,
which is
striking number.
delightful, because
Yeah.
we do not. I mean, not that they're delightful to read; they're a horror fest. But it's delightful from a historical perspective to have so many eyewitnesses. Not that eyewitness accounts are necessarily the best accounts, because they're really within the fog of war, but they are nevertheless really treasured by us, right? To have on the ground, what did they think? What did it look like from their eyes? And there is a very, very large number of them. I don't think all of them have been translated.
I don't think all of them have been translated. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. But there's some major ones. I was able in dealing with the gunpowder weapons and at the siege back. It was like my fourth article. I was able to deal with it with the translations that were available, and there's, I mean, they're still very accessible. One of the interesting things is the Mehmed, like some of the other great leaders, Saladin and Alexander the Great and others, recognized his place in history. So he had at least one secretary who's writing everything down. And he has one secretary who's writing everything down in Greek. And he is a Greek man who's being paid to do this, Critopoulos. And so he actually gives us the viewpoint from within Mehmed's camp, as well as having the viewpoint from the city, within the city, and those over in Galata who are Genoese who are writing these down too. So this is the first time we've actually got eyewitnesses from both sides and from a third party that's also an eyewitness.
yeah, yeah. It is. It makes it capable to really give a clear picture of this fight. Um,
I can't guarantee the moment you step into to looking at the Siege of Constantinople, you'll never go back. It stays with you, because it is such a massive undertaking and it's such a moment in history, where decisive battle. It one day Byzantine, the next day Ottoman.
and yeah, if you go today, just go out to the walls. Just go out to the walls, look at those walls, and
Yeah,
imagine, if you will, trying to get over them, to get through them.
yeah,
It's unbelievable the amount of carnage that had to have occurred just simply on the walls in that desperate few hours as they tried to get over, when it came to the final assault, because that's where most of the deaths would have happened in the siege, as opposed to the aftermath. There's probably more
yeah.
deaths happening at that point, but the military fight there on the wall, it's awful, just awful. They do a
It
pretty good
is.
job of it in that panorama
They
museum. I
do
think
actually.
it's
Yeah,
pretty cool. They sort of give you what it would have looked like from Mehmet's lines, looking at the walls, and the sort of the desolation of the landscape in between that's been just torn to ribbons at this point. Even a month and a few weeks of siege has done the landscape no favors. But they really have some wonderful details of the logistics of what's going on, and the transports that are required to bring these the balls to the artillery, and all. I mean, there's so much going on. And then of course you get the idea of what it must have been like, that final assault. It's
yeah.
it's pretty dramatic.
There's not a lot of artifacts. It's more of an interpretation in the museum, but
Yeah,
do go if you
yeah,
go, because I think, I was prepared for it to be cheesy. I was prepared for it to be like the one I had seen in Gettysburg or the one I'd seen in Waterloo, which are done in the 19th century and a little bit more flamboyant. This one was, I thought, very well done, and you're absolutely right. You actually get to where you see the siege from the Byzantine, or from the Ottoman
yeah,
lines, and that's where they've got the museum is where the Ottoman lines would have been. But yeah, and Mehmed does rebuild the walls because he has to. It's his capital then afterwards, but and some of them have fallen since then. But there's still the massive size of them. It's just breathtaking.
yeah. I
It's
mean, most of Istanbul is pretty darn breathtaking.
Yeah,
Um,
it is pretty
so,
done.
what is there that you wish you had from this fight? Is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked. I would like a little bit more to know about the life of Byzantium. Most of the eyewitnesses are writing about the battle, and they don't really tell us what the lead up is. And it'd be nice to know how what the preparations might have been for these people, and also really if we could get an account of the fear of what a non-combatant inside the city of Byzantium might have felt at that time. I think that would be interesting. I'd also like a little bit better account as to what happens afterwards. We assume more about the depredations following the siege than we have evidence for, direct evidence for. I don't think we're wrong. It'd be just nice to have the evidence that said, yes, this is what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, we have sources that talk about the horrific, the raping and the enslavement and horrible things being done to children. We have that in some of our accounts, but and this isn't. I'm almost assuredly those things did occur. Did they occur on the scale of what we're getting for propaganda, or what is the truth of that? It would be as horrible as the truth would be. It would be good to know the truth
Yeah.
of that. I think for both sides to know what that was truly like. I agree.
And Critobulus' account doesn't say much. I mean, he stops and says, okay, there were 3 days of pillage, and that's that, because he's writing, of course, under the pay of the Sultan. I don't think the Sultan wants the depredations to be known. But it would normally follow. It would be nice to see. I'd also be nice to have an account from a ship. What was it like to be on a ship, either one in the harbor that's protected and until the fleet comes overland, or one in the Sea of Marmara that may have been an Ottoman ship. It'd be nice to say, what are they doing as they're sitting out there just waiting for the land forces to have effect, because they can't do much otherwise. They can't land and attack the walls themselves. So
Right.
that'd be fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, just as a for instance of this kind of stuff, like, Leonard of Chios is an eyewitness account.
Mhm.
And he's got terrific explanations of what's happening. And he talks about in the aftermath, 60,000 Christians being captured, all of the crosses being torn down, everything. Women were raped, virgins deflowered, youths forced to take part in shameful obscenities. The nuns left behind, even those who were obviously such, were disgraced with foul debaucheries, he says. Um, yeah, again, probably. Um, he's also writing for the Pope.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
is he, you know, is
And
that
then,
part of what's happening here, right? And he's sort of
yeah.
again, sort of propaganda, or sort of like, this is what tends to happen. This is what is the truth of that would be, again, horrible to know, but also
Yeah.
important to know.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
that sounds very much like the accounts after the Ottomans hit Otranto in 1480. And some of the other places, you do wonder how much of it is a trope and how much of it is actually accurate. There
it,
are
it,
there are theological reasons why Muslim soldiers should not rape. I mean, they go to hell. That's it. That's pretty direct. But whether
it,
you
it
can keep it in that type of battle, whether you could keep everything together and think theologically, I don't think so.
taking the crosses being torn down and trampled out of it.
Sure.
Everything you're getting
Sure.
there is also the exact same thing that the English are said to have done when they take Caen, when Edward III's army takes
Yeah.
Caen.
Yeah.
That's what, Jean Lebel, that's exactly what he describes, is these horrific things that the English do to the French, including, this is what they did to, 60 nuns here and da 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 da. Again, maybe, but also, is that true? Of course, how would we know? It would be awful probably to know the truth, but it'd be good to know. Okay, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It would be
So yeah, Siege of Constantinople, 1453,
yeah
big one, big one.
a big
Speaking
one.
speaking of big things, Our next episode is going to be the big 50, episode 50,
Yeah,
which is pretty crazy. Episode 50.
it's
And it will
pretty
also be
crazy.
our 10th Q&A. So we sort of talked about like, are we going to do something special for our 50th episode? And the answer is no, we're not. But it's a
We're asking
Q&A.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah, send in good questions, y'all, because it's our 50th Q&A. It'd be lovely to have some real kind of stumpers or uh if you just want to ask like, hey, how is it that you guys are so cool? We'll do our best to answer, like we'll
Yeah.
give it a shot. So yes, our 10th Q&A, get those questions in as soon
You
as you
imagine.
can.
It's funny, Mike mentioned today just before we got on, this is our 50th, and I hadn't even thought about that. I'm just excited about the Q&A. I think the Q&A sessions are some of the fun. Some of the fun is for me because there's no preparing for them. We get these questions, we kind of keep them to ourselves, and then we just throw them out there. So there's a lot more spontaneity, I think, in those. You may think that all we do is no preparation when we go through these things. Well, at least we've got the names, dates, and places next to us.
Yeah.
With the Q&A, it's all over, and we do have some left over from before, but send them on in. We
Yeah,
you
yeah. I'm looking at yeah, we got a handful still in the basket, but yeah, send in more, please. Please, 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 please. So yes, please do join us next time when we'll be doing our 10th Q&A for a very special episode 50. And as ever, a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by medievalists.net. So the best way to support us, other than buying our individual books, of course, is to join their Patreon at patreon.com/medievalists. That's also the absolute best place to drop us a line if you have a question for our Q&As. Cheers, everybody.
absolutely. Cheers.